Bad habits, what are they and why haven't you been able to control them yet? That's going to be the topic of this video. As you could see in my last video, I basically touched upon how I kind of introduced the idea in my last video, basically talking about how in this one, I was going to actually break down what bad habits actually are, where they arise from, and how you can actually, for once and for all, establish a good cycle of habits. In my last video, I kind of touched upon this topic, how in this video I'd basically break it down a little bit more as to how you can break bad habits for good, because I'm going to actually introduce to you where these bad habits are actually arising from and what you can do to set yourself up onto a good track of good habits, so you set yourself up for happiness and success. So like many of you, I've also gotten onto this path of self-improvement where you find yourself realizing that you're in a rut, you're kind of just in a slump, you're kind of just in a slump where you're in a cycle of bad habits that you want to break, and after a couple of days or a couple of weeks you actually find yourself trying to improve and you find yourself actually establishing some good habits, but I just magically out of nowhere you kind of find yourself on this never-ending cycle on repeat, just finding yourself going back to the same old bad habits and doing the things that you simply don't want to. And then you get some motivation, whether it's from friends, parents, or some YouTube videos, to establish yourself to get onto a good routine again, and then you find yourself just in this never-ending cycle. This never-ending cycle is actually called like the self-help depression thing, which a lot of people don't talk about. They only talk about the benefits of self-help, because in the beginning it's actually a lot uglier than you think it is. And I kind of want to break you off this self-help depression loop, and it's basically what I just described, where you get onto a good routine for a couple of days or a couple of weeks and find yourself on these bad habits again, kind of magically out of nowhere. And it feels really annoying because you want to keep these good habits going for good, but you just find yourself going back to zero, and you feel guilty every time when you do go back to zero. I want to break this down a little bit more and to firstly saying that if you're doing anything to actually improve yourself, and you're, even if it's just a couple of days or a couple of weeks, you're at least engaging in some positive thought and trying to enact some positive change. So I applaud you for actually taking the step and trying to do that. So don't bash yourself up too much, and speak to yourself a little bit nicer when you do go back to those bad habits and bad routines, because you're at least in the effort and process of trying. However, this never-ending cycle is definitely exhausting and can cause actually more grief than just being in that bad cycle to begin with, because within that bad cycle, at least you know that you're not supposed to be doing these things, but at least you're getting some sort of temporary joy from it. Whereas when you're doing these good things and then you go back to doing the bad things that you don't want to do, then you find yourself guilty, and guiltiness is probably one of the strongest negative emotions there are, because you know that there is good things that you should be doing but you're not, and you find yourself in this cycle. So basically the main point of this video is trying to get you off of this self-help depression cycle once and for all, by actually describing where these bad habits actually arise from, and to give you some tangible steps as to how you can get off this cycle for once and for all. So like I said, when it comes to bad habits, you know that these cycles and these patterns that you've established for yourself are not good, yet you find yourself continuously going back to them. Almost just feels like there's an invisible force controlling you to do these things. So I'm going to break down why these bad habits exist in the first place. And what I'm about to say is kind of non-traditional from what most YouTubers say. They kind of just keep it at more of a mental level, but I kind of want to break it down into more of a spiritual level. And what I'm going to say kind of comes from the book called the Bhagavad Gita. I'm gonna post a picture of it right here. I don't have the book with me physically right now, it's somewhere in the house, but this book is actually very, very, I don't want, like, good is just like an understatement. I haven't read it from start to finish because it is a very heavy book, and it does require a lot of readings and interpretations of it. And it's not just like a self-help book that you read from start to finish, say that this is a good book and just put it on the shelf. This book is extremely transformative and contains all the answers to your life that you're actually looking for. In this book, it basically is it's not a self-help book. It's not just an encyclopedia book. Like if you just want information on Google to how to break bad habits, you can literally just do that, like do a Google search for that, which I'm sure that you have done before, but you find yourself in the same never-ending cycle. And that's because these are just touching on these issues at a more mental level, whereas this book is more of a spiritual book and kind of includes information, includes more of a transformation approach to improving yourself and improving your life, rather than just filling your head with information and knowledge. Because if information and knowledge was all that you needed, you would already be fixed, but that's not the case. So in this book, it gives more of a spiritual explanation as to why these bad habits exist, and I'm going to kind of break it down by providing 2 quotes as well as providing a bit of an explanation on them. So I won't harp on like how good this book is. I would rather just explain like little verses from it and try to explain it a little bit more, so that you can understand just how powerful this book really is, and that you actually try to start reading it one day. But back into like the topic of why bad habits exist, I'm going to provide these 2 quotes. Basically, I'm going to read this quote directly. An idle mind is the devil's workshop. If the senses are idle and one tries to empty the mind, then what usually transpires is that the mind becomes engaged in unproductive thoughts, and eventually the sense objects carry the mind and senses away. Now, from this verse, it transitions into a conversation between the main character and the spiritual leader of this book. And it says, and the main character says, "What is it that makes a man perform impious activities even against his will, as if by force?" So basically, impious activities means like bad things, like bad habits that they don't want to do. And the spiritual leader of this book says, "It is lust which transforms itself into anger that is manifested from the mode of passion. Know this lust to be totally insatiable and extremely evil. It is the great enemy of the world. You must first bring the senses under control and eliminate lust, which is the embodiment of all impiety and the destroyer of knowledge and realization. Knowing the individual unit of consciousness to be superior to the intelligence, steady the mind with the pure intellect of the self and conquers this indomitable enemy in the form of lust." So I'm going to break these verses down a little bit. To start with the very first quote, basically the idle mind is the devil's workshop. This quote is pretty straightforward. When the mind is empty, bored, and directionless, this is when unwanted and unproductive thoughts start to arise. This quote kind of, on a deeper analysis, this quote proves and shows that why having goals and a sense of purpose and a sense of direction is extremely important. Because when you're working on things that like align with your purpose and things that align with your goals, and you're occupied with them, it's very difficult for just unwanted thoughts and like bad habits to just like suddenly come up into your mind. Obviously that is a possibility, but it's much more likely when you're directionless, lost, and you just aren't on a track of trying to achieve your purpose or goals. On a deeper note, what this quote is also saying is that your thoughts influence your actions. So an idle mind leads to unwanted thoughts, and those thoughts lead to unwanted actions. So when you're sitting there bored, directionless, lost, this leads to unwanted thoughts, which then leads to unwanted actions. Once you understand this, that having some sort of purpose and some sort of direction is the first step into controlling these unwanted thoughts, the next step, and obviously, like I said, that unwanted thoughts aren't just like, you can't just have your purpose and have some sort of direction and just all your unwanted thoughts go away. That's not how it works, because that very much is still a possibility even when you're on your purpose and you're in your life's mission. Basically, it says that these unwanted thoughts arise from lust, which is transformed into anger. And on a deeper note, basically this lust and this anger stems from poor mental health. Is anger, but at a deeper level, lust. Even I know like lust just usually I know that lust usually just refers to like certain videos that you don't want to be looking at, or scrolling on Instagram, seeing these pictures and like these videos of things that you don't want to. But even activities such as like excessive gambling or excessive whatever it is that you're doing, these actually, especially in the man's mind, all stem from activities. All of these activities, such as looking at videos that you don't want to be looking at, watching TV that you shouldn't be watching, just uncontrollable gambling, all of these things is basically due to just an unproductive mind and a lost and uncontrolled mind, and not having any sense of direction or purpose. But at a deeper level, all of these thoughts are coming from uncontrolled lust. Important to note that these verses also say that the more that you entertain these thoughts, the stronger these thoughts become. And like I said, thoughts lead to actions. So the more that you entertain these thoughts, the more that you're actually entertaining these actions. It's very important to note that once these unwanted thoughts come, even when you're on your purpose and your mission to achieving whatever it is that you want, these unproductive thoughts are going to happen. But once they arrive within the first few seconds, they need to be firstly acknowledged and controlled within the first few seconds. Otherwise, they become stronger and stronger. No chances. The more you get, the better that you get at controlling these thoughts within the first few seconds of arising, the stronger your willpower becomes against these unwanted thoughts, until they just become very, very vacant, and then they become just a thing of the past. To give you an analogy, it's almost like buying a bag of chips, opening the bag of chips, and then keeping it next to you, and then saying that you're not going to eat it. After a while, that smell, the sight of those greasy, oily chips is just going to become so strong that your thoughts are going to become so strong that they ultimately influence your actions to where you're ultimately eating those chips. This is the same concept that applies to other bad habits. The more that you play around with these thoughts, the stronger the force around these thoughts become, until they ultimately uplift your complete rationale and consciousness around the badness that surrounds these thoughts, that you feel kind of just impulsed. This is this invisible force that I'm talking about that controls your impulses and stops you from thinking rationally and consciously. Again, it's very important that after you've set some goals or set some sort of direction and purpose for your life, it's very important to realize that these unwanted thoughts will still happen, but you need to control them within the entry gates or within the first few seconds of them entering your mind. Like I said, this is something that will take a lot of time and practice, but the more and more and more you do it, the easier it becomes. Now that you understand why these bad habits arise and that they actually come from underlying uncontrolled sexual behavior in the form of lust, which actually turns into anger. Now that you understand that it comes from those places, it's very important to locate the physical sources from where these the forces around these bad habits actually arise. If it's lust that you're trying to control, or it's bad eating that you're trying to control, whatever bad habits are, the bad habits that you're trying to control are, locate the physical sources of these things. So like I said, if it's lust, like videos that you know you shouldn't be watching, or looking at things on Instagram or on TikTok that you know that you shouldn't be watching, where are the physical sources? Is it your TV? Is it your phone? Is it your laptop? If once you can locate these physical sources, by regulating them, by limiting them, by keeping them away and staying away from these physical sources, it becomes so much easier to resist them because they're not physically in front of you. It's like the bag of chips that I was talking about. When that bag of chips is not right there in front of you, it's way easier to not think about those chips. It's the same thing when you're on your phone and just mindlessly scrolling, or your laptop is in front of you and you have tabs open. How much more easy does it become to do the bad thing that you didn't want in the first place? So once you locate that where the physical source of those bad habits are coming from, by regulating them and keeping them away, it's so much easier for these unwanted thoughts to not arise in the first place. Now, I'm not saying that they won't ever arise. That's just not possible, but it becomes so much easier once physical sources are located to then regulate them. You've eliminated a wavering mind, and you've actually set your mind onto some sort of goals and mission. You've already won 50% of the battle right there. Then the second step becomes realizing in that other 50% that these bad habits actually arise from a deeper level of poor mental health, and that this needs to be regulated. I will touch on that in a second. But then the third thing is that realizing that these unwanted thoughts, no matter what you do, will still arise. So then locating the physical sources of where these unwanted thoughts actually arise from, and regulating them on the onset, so that these bad habits, once they arise, or that these bad unwanted thoughts arise, you can control them within the few seconds, because you know the physical sources of where they arise from. But also knowing that the more that you play with these thoughts, the more that you think about it, the more that you allow these bad thoughts to continue to consume your mind, this negative force will completely uplift all your rational and conscious thinking around these thoughts. So now that those are taken care of, that's already 80% of the battle. The remaining 20% of the battle is that those thoughts, no matter what you do, will still continuously, for the remainder of your life, will still come about, because that's just human nature. Our mind is extremely active and is constantly all over the place. That's the mind's job. The mind, as powerful as it is, also has the vulnerable side in which it will continuously go to places which you don't want it to. And fortunately, there is a way to control these unwanted thoughts as much as possible, and it's called through meditation. Obviously, by now you've heard of what meditation is, and you probably have some sort of idea of how to do it. The only thing that you need from now is to actually get onto a daily basis of some mindfulness practice and some sort of meditation, because meditation at its simplest form is simply controlling the mind's thoughts. That meditation is, to literally quiet the mind and to increase your levels of consciousness. All meditation is doing is keeping the mind more present and keeping those unwanted thoughts from coming. Now, when you combine all of these three things, once you understand that an unfocused and unproductive mind is the devil's workshop, that's the first thing. You realize where these bad habits are coming from, specifically in the form of poor mental health. And then third, that the reason why this invisible force feels so strong is because you're playing with these thoughts in your mind and not actually controlling them within the first few seconds of them arising, combined with a mindfulness meditation that actually the sole purpose of all of it is to keep your mind present and mindful, as well as keeping these unproductive thoughts as far away as possible. When you combine all of these four things, it becomes extremely hard for bad habits to continue to arise, but as well as keeps you away from bad habits, keeps you away from stumbling off that path of good habits, and keeps you away from getting into that same endless self-depression cycle once and for all. With meditation, you will notice how much more focus and concentration you have into actually going towards those goals and those dreams and that purpose that you have set for yourself. You will notice how much easier it becomes when the mind is more quiet and you have a singular focus. The whole point of meditation is to create a present form of your mind so that so that the mind becomes more quiet and that you don't have all of these unwanted thoughts just continuously circling back in the mind. So to start, just do a simple 10 to 15 minutes worth of breath work every single day, and you'll realize how much easier it is to focus and concentrate, and you don't have these unproductive and unwanted thoughts that distract you from your purpose and your goals and takes you off of this path that you're on and keeps you on this never-ending cycle of the help depression cycle. Three things I want you to take away from this video. One, that the very start of bad habits is from just being unproductive and just having an idle mind. If you don't have any goals, or you don't have any mission, or you don't have any purpose that you want to set out, these constant bad thoughts and habits are going to continuously arise. And like I said, bad thoughts and unproductive and unwanted thoughts are going to lead to unwanted actions. So set some sort of small goals or some small purpose that you want, that'll serve as the guide in your day-to-day life, so that you can, because these goals and these purpose will set as the good in your life that you want. And these bad habits, like these bad thoughts, will become so much less prevalent when you have something that you want to strive for. If becoming an athlete and becoming in the best shape of your life is something that's your goals and purpose, those unwanted thoughts of going to McDonald's becomes so much easier to regulate and control. The second part I want you to realize is that these unproductive and unwanted thoughts simply come from poor mental health, which is masked by anger and lust. All of these bad things that you don't want are actually coming in the form of anger and lust. And the third thing I want you to realize is that once these unproductive and unwanted thoughts enter your mind, they need to be controlled and regulated within the first few seconds. If you don't regulate these thoughts within the first few seconds, the stronger these thoughts become. And this is the invisible force that I'm talking about, that literally controls you and could uplifts all of your rational and conscious mind into knowing that these things are bad, and you ultimately doing these bad things anyways. If you do not control these thoughts within the first few seconds, you're done for. It's completely over with. And like I said, this act of practicing regulating these thoughts within the first few seconds can be done by just actively doing that on a daily basis when these thoughts arise, by shifting your mind and focus onto these productive thoughts once again. But thirdly, and more effectively, is just meditation. Meditation will show you within the first week or first month how active and overactive your mind is. And by shifting your focus from all thoughts in general to one singular focus, over time, the mind will become more and more quiet, and the easier it is to actually focus on the good path that you set for yourself. So by doing all of these activities on a daily basis, it'll become impossible for you to fall into a slump of bad habits continuously, and you will, for once and for all, you understand why the self-help depression cycle continuously exists. Now that you have these tools, you can actually set yourself up for good habits for once and for all, and don't have to rely on these stupid techniques of New Year's resolutions, and you don't just rely on willpower. Those two things alone just simply won't get you to where you want to be. Once you have a clear understanding from this video of why these bad habits arise, how you can actually regulate them, now the question just becomes, will you actually stick to this plan and actually execute on trying to improve? You understand why this self-help cycle depression exists. Now you're actually setting yourself up for continuously staying on these good habits for once and for all, and eradicating these bad habits to the best of your abilities. Now it just becomes a question, are you willing to stick to this, as difficult as it may be? Are you willing to stick to this plan of setting goals, regulating your thoughts, and meditating on a daily basis? If you can do these things, basically the world is yours, and all the success that you want will ultimately come to you. It'll just take time. Hopefully this video provides you more of a framework on more of a spiritual level, and not just a quick fix self-help guide, and actually sets you up for success in the long run. As always, I hope that you've gotten some value from this, and if you did, please leave a comment, a like, and please subscribe to my channel, and I'll continue to make videos just like this that are actually substantial and worthwhile. With that being said, that's all that I have for this video. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace.